But thank you all so much for joining us for a visit with the Tsongas Industrial History Center for their presentation, The Life and Work of Mill Girls. Follow the journey of a mill girl from her family farm in the New England countryside to her new job operating a loom in Lowell's Boott cotton mills. Meet two mill girls during this virtual visit to their boarding house and weave room, learning about each girl's unique experience of life and work in a textile mill, and experience a bit of what it was like to work in the mills. And this presentation is brought to you by Park Rangers MaryBeth Faucher. Hope I'm getting that right. And
Close
Frank
enough.
Clark. Close enough. All right. And Ranger Frank Clark. So all 150 of us or so who are watching live, and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Frank and MaryBeth for being with us today. And MaryBeth and Frank, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
All right. Hi, everybody. Hope you guys are all having a wonderful Friday out there. We are glad to see you here from Lowell, or pretend to see you from Lowell. We always love these virtual things because we can play a little bit. My name is Frank, and I'll be with you today.
And I am MaryBeth, and we work at Lowell National Historical Park and the Tsongas Industrial History Center here in beautiful downtown Lowell, Massachusetts. The Tsongas Center is actually an educational partnership between Lowell National Historical Park and the University of Massachusetts Lowell. And there we are. That's the building that we're in right now.
Although it looks a little bit different if you actually are in Lowell or come by, because they're doing some construction just on the bridge there, and it's got a lot more action than normal. But that's okay. We appreciate it. It makes it a little bit better for all of us in the long run. All right, guys. So we are going to move right into here. Let me see.
And we will say that we like to be interactive, so we will be asking you some questions, and you can throw answers in the chat because we like to know what you're thinking as we go through the program today.
We back in the days of early COVID, when we all went live with kids all around the country, it was crazy to work with little third and fourth and fifth graders who just were learning how to type, and it was so. If you guys can get close, we're happy.
We got
right.
really good at reading.
Yeah.
Phonetically.
And just as a note, in my outside of the park world, I host trivia games, and people are always saying, "Oh, I apologize for my handwriting." People have bad handwriting, but that's okay. We get it. All right. Hopefully you guys are familiar with this picture. I think you probably have seen it before, and most of you I saw flowing in on the chat were from New England, but some of you from other places. And
Florida
we
and
appreciate.
Baltimore.
Yeah, great.
Maine.
So we are in Lowell, and if you're not familiar, if you're just not sure exactly where we are in Massachusetts, and we are in the sort of upper northeast middle section there on the Merrimack River here in the Middlesex community, Middlesex County, and that's basically where our story is set. Oh, look, Phoenix. That's exciting.
Nice.
And let's jump right into a little video here. And if you haven't been, we'll get you a little sense of that. Just a little tease there, but we have a question for you. What do you already know about the Industrial Revolution and the mill girls who worked in Lowell? We said we're going to be talking about the mill girls in Lowell today. Do you already know a lot, or have any thoughts about it already? If you
Nothing
do,
is an okay answer too. Yeah, throw things in the chat.
Somebody knows a lot. My family were mill workers. Very good. Well, we've written a song about them. That's great. Girls were from farms. Yep.
Yep. Black
Conditions were
lung.
difficult. Yep. Long days work, low offering,
The
farm
working
girls.
conditions were horrific, so farm girls came here.
Started young.
They came from all over.
Yeah. Women support themselves, right? First labor strikes, yes. Girls from Ireland a little bit later, yep. Bells of New England, yep, I've seen that one.
Yeah,
Wow, it's coming in fast now.
I know. um,
Oh,
we
yes,
have
if you go
several
to
people who have had
Manchester and see that, yep.
several people who have had ancestors work in the mills.
Hmm.
Um,
You guys know a lot. Excellent.
all right. So we're actually going to meet a couple of mill girls today because we thought it was the best way to give you a good experience about what it was like here. But we're going to start. I don't know. Frank's jumping way ahead of me here.
I'm
So,
sorry, I didn't know it was on the next line. Sorry.
all right. So today we are going to explore the lives of the mill girls. These were young women who generally came to the mills of Lowell from places like Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont. And we're talking like 200 years ago. And we're going to discuss some of the decisions that they had to face and um, some of the things that affected their lives as we go through. So you can even kind of take a minute and think about some of the major decisions that you've had to make in your life and which way you went and why you made the decisions that you did. And so we're going to go back in time to the early 1800s. And before we get into the mill girls, we're going to look at where they came from, which was farming in most
Yep.
cases.
A lot of people in the chat were talking about them coming from the farms.
Yep.
Very good. All right, so now we're going to jump back to that picture I showed you a little earlier, and let's make sure I get the right place here. All right, are we back again, MaryBeth?
There we go.
There we go. All right, so there we go. We got a little picture there, and you can see a little question there. If you don't know, maybe you guys live on a farm now. I don't know. If you don't know, what do you think life was like on a farm back in the day? So what kinds of chores, what kinds of life, what kind of things did they do? Any thoughts about that? What life was like on that farm? Do you have a idealistic vision? Is it a realistic vision? What do you think about farm
Farm
life?
life was very hard.
Milking and shoveling, that kind of sums up a lot, yeah.
Yeah, 7 days a week.
Tending to
Collect egg bug.
animals,
Mm,
a wicked hard life. There we go.
that's New England.
Getting up
Hard
early,
life.
making everything from scratch. Yes, 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 very important.
Isolated. Up early to bed late. Long, physical, hard day every day. Prepping food, growing it, chopping wood, doing all your clothes, making all your clothes, keeping wood for the fire. So I think, Frank, that everybody's got the same idea. Life on a farm was
Mm-hmm,
not something that was easy. Everything that family made generally came from their own hands. And if they didn't
mm-hmm,
make it themselves, they had to trade for it. So maybe I will trade the tinsmith some potatoes or some eggs for a new plate, or
mm-hmm.
maybe even trading labor. I'll trade you some work on a fence for something that a new horseshoe.
Yeah. I love the no Uber Eats. Yes,
Oh, I don't
no
know.
Uber Eats. Yeah, and
They would love
everybody's
to.
busy, all long days, up early, working late, doing all kinds of physical work. Yes, all kinds of stuff going on. So to get us started, we're going to move on and take a look at a video, right, MaryBeth?
Yeah, we're going to meet Sarah, who grew up on a farm in Vermont, and learn a little bit about what her life was like.
All right, so let's take a look at what she has to say.
My name is Sarah, and I come from hardworking people. Back home on the farm, my family had to make or grow almost everything that we needed, although we did get to trade for a few things. All throughout the year, my 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and I had different jobs to do. My family was fortunate enough to have our own loom, so a job that me and my sisters shared was weaving. My younger sisters would spend the spring and the summer carding the sheep's wool and spinning it into thread. Throughout the winter, when the days would turn cold and we could see our breath outside, we would then weave it into cloth. It would take 1 whole hour just to make a single yard of cloth. All of this hard work, and still, me, my sisters, and my brothers did not have many clothes to wear.
All right. Does anybody want to? Yes, you probably should be. Sharon, you should be able to see the chat. I don't know why you can't. Hopefully you can pull it up on your screen there. Anybody else have any thoughts about what you were hearing Sarah saying about life on the farm? Kind of says what we thought, I guess.
Or if you have any questions about
Sure.
Sarah.
Have any questions? We are happy to answer questions, and we'll try not to make up stuff. Can't guarantee it. We'll try.
All right. So around that same time that Sarah was coming to the city of Lowell, the 1830s, the city of Lowell became a center for cloth production in New England. There were giant mill buildings called mills or factories making cloth out of cotton. And there were hundreds and hundreds of machines and ultimately thousands of people working in these factories, all powered by the water from the Merrimack River. Oh, I thought I just saw a question.
How were the looms on the farm different than the ones in the mills?
Ah, great. So the looms on the farms were all hand powered. So the weaver would
Mhm.
have to step on pedals to raise threads, send the shuttle through with their hands, pull a beater bar back, and then keep going. They also had to set up the looms by hand, and that was the part that took the longest time.
Mhm.
In the factory, everything was mechanized except for the setting up part. That took a little bit longer. But everything else was mechanized. So their job was then to tend the machines and make sure everything was running properly.
All right. Are you ready? I'm gonna read a couple more to you. Ready?
Okay.
Were farms also producing flax as well as wool?
Yes, New England farms did produce flax. Flax produces nice linen. It's very hard. It's not hard to grow, but it's harder to process in many ways than wool because you have to break up the flax. And a lot of farms also made something called linsey woolsey, which was a combination of linen from flax and wool, which made the wool a little bit softer as well.
But not so much cotton. Cotton doesn't really grow around here in a
No.
reasonable way. How old would Sarah have been?
Sarah could have been anywhere from 15 years old and up. There were some younger kids working in the mills, like 14, 13. Technically, they were considered child labor and were supposed to go to school 3 months out of the year. So they really tried to recruit girls 15 years and older.
All right, this one I know you know something about, MaryBeth. It says my mom had to stop going to school after 8th grade.
So did my father. Yep.
The
And
rules
he went
back
to work
then,
in the
yeah,
mills.
yeah, the rules back then did have laws and rules about when you had to go to school, but it didn't go as long as it does today.
And
So eighth,
generally, if you could prove that your family needed you to go to work, then you didn't go to school.
mhm. And 8th grade was a normal cutoff for most of
Yeah.
the middle working time people.
Yeah. My father always
Um,
had eighth grade reunions instead of high school reunions.
can you say anything about how long it would take to make a yard of cloth
On a farm, it would
on a
take
farm?
about on a farm it would take about 13 hours to process an entire yard of cloth. So that's average time to clean the wool, brush it out, spin it into yarn, set up the loom, and then weave. The weaving itself only took about an hour, but 13 hours of prep and weaving total to make a yard on a farm. In the factory, that could be made in, oh, I'm going to have to do
Minutes.
math, in minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a couple people asking about how they found out about it, and we're going to get to that
Oh,
in a
oh, look.
moment.
Why were the mill girls recruited to work in the mills?
Yep, hang on. Before you do that, though, were there boys in the staying in the mill? Were the boys needed to stay working on the farm?
Yes. So that's one of the reasons that they recruited young women is because it was much easier to get them to leave the farm. Boys were more needed on the farm, and they also stood to inherit the farm. So it was less likely they were going to be leaving. And go ahead, Frank.
Well, I was going to say they're also more likely to get into something like a mechanical job or something involving those kind of things, and they're more likely to be the people who are starting to head west.
Yeah. And the sad but true fact is that they could pay women less money. So it was easier to get them. It was an untapped workforce, and they could pay them less money than men. So they really did fill their mills with mostly women.
All right, but they were asking about how they found out about it. So you
Yeah,
ready to jump
so
into that?
mill owners sent men called recruiters out to New England towns to try to get people to come to the mills. And our next video has Emily talking about meeting a recruiter.
They may have recruited through churches and other groups, so or other ways they were going out to the towns. So we'll find out. We'll find out something about wages, about recruiting. So let's see what Emily has to say. Here we go.
Good day. My name is Emily. About a year ago, a recruiter from Lowell, Mr. Huss, visited my village, and he was looking for young women between the ages of 15 and 35 to work in the mills. He promised that in addition to earning cash wages, we would have rooms and a meal at a boarding house, all with the proper supervision of a boarding house keeper. He also told us about the educational and social opportunities in Lowell, and that we would attend church every Sunday. After discussing it with my parents, I decided to come and work in Lowell. Now that I've been working here for a year, I'm able to save money for my future, buy new clothes, and even send some money home to help my family. There is so much to do here and so many lively people to talk to.
Emily.
She's
All right.
very excited.
Let's throw it back out to you guys. Is there anything surprising about what she said? Anything that you were you curious about? No, most of those ladies were not park rangers. You're surprised by all of it, Heather. Wow, that's interesting. It is kind of surprising. People don't always think about it. No complaints. Yeah, she wasn't too unhappy about it. Would they send money home? What do you think, MaryBeth?
There was no Venmo. Yes, a lot of these young women came here specifically to send money home to help out. But even with sending money home, they were still able to save some for themselves. There was a young woman from Maine who came, who we know came to send money back to her family, and yet we have a receipt where she bought $10 worth of gold jewelry.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple in here saying, were the living conditions as idyllic as she said? Did the pitch that they made match reality? Is her experience typical?
So the living conditions actually were pretty good. They did keep the boarding houses in good shape. They had a boarding house keeper who took care of them. And so there weren't a lot of complaints about the living conditions themselves. Most of the complaints came from the long days and the low pay. As far as
That
how many
being
people live,
said,
good.
not everybody had the same experience, or
Right,
not everybody thought the same of the same experience.
right, right. All right. Are you ready to hop on the stagecoach and go to Lowell?
All right, let's go see if we
Oh,
can.
and to answer the question, yes, the two, Emily and Sarah, are park rangers.
Yes, the actresses thereof, yes. All right, so let's take a little ride on our stagecoach to Lowell and be part of the story. And we will get to the dangerous conditions in a minute.
Yep. All right. So as a new worker to Lowell, Emily would have gone right to a boarding house. Boarding houses held between generally 25 to 35 people. They were generally the same gender, and they were taken care of by a boarding house keeper. The boarding houses were actually owned by the mill owners, and it was a way of one, ensuring parents think about sending kids off to college. If they're living in a dorm, you know that they have a safe place to stay, and you know they're getting meals at the dining hall. This was the same way. The boarding house keeper cooked and cleaned for them and made sure that they were safe and made sure they followed all of the rules. The other reason that they had the boarding houses is because they could set up rules and could have somebody to make sure that they followed them. So it was also a way of controlling the mill workers throughout their entire day.
Mm-hmm. A couple of questions. People are talking about meals. Yes, as MaryBeth just said, the boarding houses had a boarding house keeper who was responsible for maintaining the rules, but also providing food. But it wasn't free. It wasn't something that you got just because you were here. You had to pay for it. The place to live, room and board. Danger and noise and things like that. Are these pictures of Lowell at the time of the Mill Girls? The one that was on the screen right now is a picture
Yep.
from that time. So this
The,
is
the
the
boarding houses are
boarding
on the
houses.
left-hand side of the screen
Hmm.
with the factory at the end.
And this picture is it's sort of a colorized version of a picture from that time period too. So this
Yep.
is actually based on a picture of that time. So these two are pretty good, but this one is from a painting. So you can see that there's some parts of it that are made to look a little
Idealized.
idealized, a little better than. I don't think those are the kind of clothes you have on your typical work person.
Frank, I just wanted to go back. I saw a question about banks. They did have a
Mhm.
bank, and many of these women saved hundreds or even thousands of dollars while they were here. And yeah, somebody asked about price gouging in the boarding houses because the mills owned the boarding houses. They did have to pay to live there, and they paid about $1.25 a week. And actually, that wasn't enough to run the boarding houses. The mills actually supplemented that $1.25 for each person, and that money went to the boarding house keeper to run the boarding house. So they weren't price gouging them. They were doing not they weren't even getting enough from them to run the boarding houses, and they actually added a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a different approach here. When they set up these early mills, the plan was to have a decent place for them to live, both so that they would have place for the workers to live, and also so that it would uh, appear right to everybody else, to the people looking on from a side. This was a new experiment, right? And so they weren't running, and they're certainly not doing what we would think of as like a company store where it's like you're trapped and you could only buy what you had to do and it was pay. So they're making, in their terms, about average of like maybe like $3 a week, and a dollar and a half of that is going to room and board. Um, the mills are the mills profitable? Yes, the mills were very profitable.
Yeah.
um, we're talking right now the 1830s and the 1840s for the most part. Um, do the mill girls have chores for staying in the boarding house?
And somebody in the questions also asked about laundry.
Hmm. Do you want to
So
take that one?
yeah, they didn't they that was one of the good things about here is that they didn't actually have chores to do in the boarding house itself. Their job was just to go to work. And the boarding house keeper did most of their laundry. She did all of their working clothes. The one thing that she didn't do was their, as my mother would say, their Sunday go to meeting clothes. So any of their nice clothes that they wore to go out to lectures or strolling along the promenade or to church, they were responsible for doing that laundry themselves.
Somebody asks about locking the doors, and yes, there was a timetable to the whole day,
Mhm.
not just the working day, and there was a curfew, and you were supposed to be in bed and by curfew, which is partially social control and partially making sure people are, in bed to go to work the next day. Um, did they get paid to how did the pay girls pay to get to Lowell? Yes. So, as far as I know, they weren't giving them money to transport them here. The pay was mostly just for working here. So it's probably up to the girls to pay for their own way to get themselves here.
Just a question in the question and answer. Sanitary conditions. So the boarding houses did not have running water. They had privies or outhouses out back, which was standard for the time, and there was a well. Unfortunately, next to the privies was the well, and the boarding house keeper would be bringing that water into the boarding house during the day. And one of the things that they did complain about was that there was no time or accommodation for bathing in our sleeping compartments. So they really didn't have a chance to bathe. They had a wash basin where they could wash up, but there was no real place to bathe. They would buy their own soap and towels and things like that.
Mhm. So a couple of questions. We're going to get to another video in just a moment, but before we do, two quick questions, Mary Beth. One, did it create any tension in town to have Lowell flooded with these young women?
I love that question because Lowell was not a city that mills came to. Lowell was a bunch of mills around which the city developed. The entire economy of Lowell, early Lowell, rested on those mills and on those young women that came. So as the young women came in, other businesses started to spring up. You would have milliners and bookstores and candy shops. All of those sprang up to support this new working class woman. So without them, the city of Lowell didn't even exist.
Yeah, I think if there was tension, it's probably more in the years following when more people from other countries started to arrive, and that got a little more stressful for people. There's a couple of questions here about medical care, sick leave, time off. So they don't really have sick leave. If you weren't here, you didn't get paid, and if you weren't here more than, if it became a problem, then they're going to let you go. Oftentimes, if you're sick or if you're injured, what you need to do is find somebody, one of your friends or coworkers, to cover your machine so you don't get fired. On the other hand, they did have medical um, care there were doctors in town, and there was a corporate hospital set up so that if you did get injured, there was a place to send you to. It wasn't free. They would take you, but then they would charge you afterwards. So it's a little bit of both. Time off. So you work basically 5 days a week, full time, 8 hours on Saturday. You have Sunday off, but you're supposed to go to meeting. Evenings and whatever other weekend hours are free to do whatever you want to do with them. And classes, libraries, lectures, um, all of I mean, this was a major city, so all of the people who had something to say or do or show, made their way here. So there were things to see and do here. I think this women were really taken advantage of. All right,
That's
we're
something we
asking you about
want you
that
to
one
be
later.
thinking about that as we go through
Yeah.
the rest of the program here. All right,
Um,
so let's jump back to Emily and have her show us around the boarding house a little bit.
all right, so let's take a little look at Emily.
Welcome to boarding house number 8 at the Boott Cotton Mills. 30 of us mill girls live here together, and this is where we take our meals. We have a very short time for our breakfast and noontime meal, so it can be quite rushed, and it is often noisy and crowded. After supper, we have time to go downtown to attend a lecture, shop, or speak with friends. Some girls choose to stay here to read or sew or even play the piano. This is where Mrs. Matthews, our boarding house keeper, cooks our meals. We have enough to eat and that which is good enough. I do not miss having to cook our meals on the farm. Would you like to see our bedrooms? They're just upstairs. I'm sure you'll find them quite comfortable. We share a bed, which isn't much different from sharing a bed with my sister back at the farm. You're probably used to it. It is very busy when the mill bell rings at 4:30 to wake us up, and we rush around to get ready to be at our machines by 5. We go to bed at 10 and we rise early the next morning, all to do it again. Sometimes in the evening I like to come up here where it's quiet to read or write a letter home to my family. I miss my family, but I like it here in Lowell, and I'm sure you'll like it too.
All right, so you hear a little bit of very despondent and sad sounding Emily. She's always so upset. Did they have a problem getting sufficient number of girls? Eventually, yes. But in the beginning, it was the plan that the girls were not going to stay forever. They were going to stay for a couple of years, go back, have somebody else come down. Word of mouth is a big part of it. Besides the recruiters, you're going to tell your friend or your cousin or your sister. what's going on. So there's a lot of things going on. And you hear that boarding house life isn't just sleeping and eating. It's also social and a place to hang out and a place to learn and do and things as well.
Frank, we had a question about going over the a typical day.
Mm-hmm. What do you want?
Yeah, I can do that.
You want to do that?
So typical day, the days varied a little bit depending on the time of year. In the winter, the days were a little bit shorter because it was hard to work by gas lamp or even oil lamp because most of their light in the mills came from big windows and it was natural sunshine. But a typical day might be getting up at 4:30 in the morning. The bell in the mill would ring, and they would have to be at work at their machines by 5. They would work until 7, shut their machines off, and walk back to the boarding house where they would have breakfast. At 7:30, though, they had to be back at their machines. So they had half an hour, but that also included walking across the street to their boarding houses and sitting down, eating, and then getting back to their machines. They would work until noon, where they would have, again, depending on the time of year, either half an hour or 45 minutes to eat dinner. Their biggest meal of the day was at noon, as it had been on the farm. They would then head back to the mill, and then they would work until 7 or 7:30 at night, come back at the end of the day for a supper, a lighter meal, and then they would have free time until 10 o'clock when they had to be in bed. And as Frank mentioned, that was Monday through Friday. Saturdays was a shorter day. They generally worked about 8 hours. And a lot of the lecturers that came to the city actually came on Saturdays and Saturday evenings.
Just a couple of quick things to jump back and say that they did have to pay to live here, but there was extra money beyond what the cost was for living. And that money for many of these girls was be saved in a bank. There were new banks that were set up here in the city that were not connected to or part of the factory. They were completely separate. And they did send some of that money home, and they also went to those stores and they bought things. Sanitary conditions, if you're talking about the mills, we'll get to that a little bit later. If you're talking about the boarding house, they weren't necessarily dirty. The boarding house keepers were, usually responsible in doing that. Of course, it's a little different than today, and not so much, sanitation in the terms of, hand sanitizer and things like that. But again, as MaryBeth said, no bathtubs, no showers, no running water. Actual hours, they're probably going to start about 5 in the morning, go till
We
8
just went
o'clock at
over
night.
that, dude.
Yeah. So long days. Was this Paul Tsongas's senatorial geographic area? Yes, he grew up in Lowell. He lived in Lowell. He was a city councilor, a county commissioner here in Lowell, became a congressperson from Lowell, and then was from Massachusetts a senator. So this was
He is
his
the reason
area.
that Lowell National Historical Park exists. Really. All right, shall we jump back into our mill girls here, because Emily showed us a wonderful place to live. At least I think it looks great. She's very excited about it, but living in the boarding house, as we know, was only part of the picture of Lowell. Most of their day was spent working in the mills. So if you take a look here, we can see a great kind of graphic that with the boarding houses on the right side of the picture and the mills on the left, and in between those is a canal. These mills were all water powered from power from the Merrimack River. There's a 32-foot high waterfall, and that waterfall was diverted via canal systems into the mill basements where giant water wheels turned to power the mills. And you can see the bridges there, and that's how the mill girls got from their boarding houses into the mill.
Right. So it's a nice little package here, boarding houses, canals, water, mills, all in one little place. One of the things I think is interesting, we talked about how long and hard the days were on the farm, but you also got a little variety because you had to do different things in different seasons or throughout the day, where in the factory, you're just doing one thing over and over again. That loom might make, a yard of cloth in a couple of minutes, but they're running 15 hours a day. So we're talking about work in the factories, and we're going to see Sarah, that's who we're talking about. Sarah talking a little bit about working in the factory. So here we go.
I decided to leave the farm last year, and now I work here in the weave room. This is one of 4 looms that I tend to all day. I stand at my machines with no place to sit and certainly no time for it either. Each of these looms makes 1 yard of cloth in 5 minutes, much faster than the hand looms at home. I make sure my machines run and run well. The shuttle here flies across the loom with incredible speed. I have to pay close attention. Every few minutes, the shuttle needs a new bobbin. When a thread breaks, I have to fix it. I should get back to work. My overseer will not be happy with me.
All right, we've got questions coming in fast and furious here. Was there any stealing in the mill, in the boarding houses? And if so, what would happen to the person stealing, which I can tell you right now, if there was stealing and somebody was caught, they would immediately be fired because the boarding houses and the mills were not separate entities. And they really held everybody to a high moral standard, and the girls themselves held each other to a high moral standard. And if somebody wasn't meeting that standard, then the girls themselves would sort of protest until they were relieved of duty. Hearing loss prevalent. I guarantee hearing loss was prevalent at least at some level for everybody who worked here. Those machines were very, very loud.
Someone said they came in late and want to know if there was a precursor in England. Yeah, a lot of the early work of mechanizing textile production, making all these machines, the different steps in machines like spinning and weaving, were happening in England before they got here. One of the big changes that took place, though, is that in America, in the Lowell, especially in the Lowell kind of system, they took and put all of those machines together, all of them kind of be separate little places, and put them all together into one larger factory. So this idea of a large integrated factory with lots of workers doing all these different steps is sort of a big change that takes place, and it's the sort of step of what's going to happen here and be replicated everywhere. So all over New England and eventually moving to other parts of the country is that early idea of separate little small mills and factories and cottage industries becoming these enormous factories.
Were there bathroom breaks? Generally, if you needed to run to the bathroom, you would ask somebody, your friend, to watch your loom for you, but you tried to avoid doing that whenever possible.
Yes, and you heard the noise of just a couple of machines there. You can imagine what it would be like. Carpal tunnel. I hadn't thought about it in that specific term, but yeah, think about all of the repetitive motion kind of things that would happen in a factory, plus the fact that the machines themselves were really dangerous. You know, open gears and pulleys and belts and moving parts and things flying back and forth and all kinds of things happening. Somebody asked if this talk is being recorded, and yes, it is being recorded.
Yes, it is. All right. So we've talked a little bit now. Even though we can't see you, it's time for you all to go to work. And we hope that you will participate from wherever you are, because it makes it so much more fun. And we want to give you an idea of what it might have been like to work in these factories. So Frank has gone off. He's going to try to find our overseer. And when the overseer comes in, you're going to be new workers in the factory, and you will work right along with him. All right. I think the overseer is getting a little hard to find here. There he is.
All right, people. Welcome to the Boott Cotton Mills. I hope you're ready to get to work. It's our time to get work, and we're going to operate our power looms here in the weave room, and it's your job to work hard. All right, so you're going to be operating a loom. You're going to work 12 to 14 hours, depending on the day. Is it a Saturday? I don't know. You're going to work all day except Sunday, because, there's things to do on Sunday, and you're going to get paid three. I know, slow down. I know this is hard to imagine, but yes, $3 whole for you to work here in the factory if you keep your job. So you better be behaving. All right. So here's how we're going to do this. For our purposes, you're going to have a shuttle. Your shuttle is going to look something like this. And you're going to hold it in front of you like this, and it's going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth as our machine runs as you go all day long, running back and forth and back and forth. So let's see if you can do that for me. Keep going, back
And
and forth.
I think
and
it's
back
$3
and forth.
a week, Mr. Overseer, not $3 a day.
Did I say a day? Oh my gosh, what was
$3 a week.
Was I drinking something before I got here? $3 a week. Yes, not $3 a day. All right, you're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. All right, folks, stop. It is time to stop work, and let's demonstrate how we're doing here. Okay, folks, doing pretty good. Everybody doing well? All right, I like it. Keep on going. Let's get back to work. You guys ready? You're going to earn your $3. You got to keep working. Here we go. Back to work. Here we go. Boom, two, boom, two. Keep it going. Come on. Everybody keep going. Everybody keep working. Working hard. Got to keep that job. There's that bell again. Hey guys, I've been talking to the boss. We've got some problems. All right, here's the thing. You're making $3. We had to take $1 out for the boarding house. You're still getting $2. Everything's going well, but we've had some competition. We've had some other companies come into the play. We've got stuff going on, and we need to make up the cost someplace. The boss does not want to lose any money on this deal. So here's the thing. We're going to have to take that money from you. So that $3 is now going to be a little bit less. So $2.75. Can you handle it? $2.70. I know it's still more than you make almost anywhere else, but $2.75. But get back to work. Here we go. Back and forth, then back and forth, then back and forth. And everybody keep going back and forth and back and forth. That $2.85 isn't just for free, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I heard you were good workers. They promised me good workers, but it's not enough. We got to do more. You have to go faster. So here's how it goes. You got to keep up with me. We're going to go faster if you want to earn your money. You ready? Get your hands back up. Earn your job. Here we go. Back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. Keep going. Come on. We got to keep the company going. You don't want to go out of business. Back and forth, then back and forth, and back and forth. Come on. Back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. Come on. Keep it going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. People. All right. It's come to this. If you want to keep your job, you've got to do twice the work. How are you going to do that, you say? Here's how it's going to work. You're going to work two machines. Two machines, not just one, two machines. So you're going to have one on this side and one on this side. You got to follow me. You got to keep. So you're going to go back and forth and then turn and watch the other one. And then turn and back and forth. Keep going. You got to watch all the machines. You ready? Follow along with me. Ready, set, go. Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and turn. Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and turn. Back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, turn. Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and turn and turn and turn and turn and turn.
All right. I'm seeing some great questions come into the chat. The workers didn't actually have to move the shuttle back and forth. It's just kind of a way to get you to see that their motions were repetitive and constant. What they would do is they actually had to change the shuttle the bobbin in the shuttle, which when Frank comes back, I'll have him show you that shuttle. And that lasted about every 5 or 6 minutes. You can see I'm pointing like you can see where I'm pointing. That bobbin right there would last about every five. You're not in the camera, Frank. There we go. That's perfect. That thread would last about every 5 or 6 minutes, and they would have to stop the machine and replace it. So the more machines you're doing, the more you're doing that. Also, the machines themselves could have several hundred or even over 1,000 threads going perpendicular, and they were constantly watching to make sure none of those broke. So they were constantly watching and making repairs as they went. And so it was possible to watch more looms. And over time, the looms had better stop mechanisms. So if something went wrong, the looms would stop, giving them time to go over and fix it rather than creating a hole in the fabric. Once that happened, it was easier to watch more machines. So they started watching more machines. Now, theoretically, they got paid by how much cloth they made. So instead of 2 looms, if you're watching 4, you're making twice as much fabric. You should make twice as much money. Unfortunately, they cut their pay per piece. So they were making roughly the same amount of money working more machines because the machines were easier to run. The clothing, as you saw, our mill girls are wearing long dresses, as was the style. We have drawings that mill girls have made with them with their sleeves rolled up. We have, and they also started to go shorter, so they weren't right on the ground. But long clothing was definitely a problem. And I just lost my chat. Hold on here.
But they would also have
There,
less, they wouldn't have as many layers and things like that. So it would be long clothing, but wouldn't necessarily be full flowing kind of things.
and the threads did cause a lot of cotton dust, and that was another problem, brown lung disease, where those threads were building up in your lungs like the lint trap in a dryer, and that's what was in the lungs. And
Yep.
yep, there it says, was water readily available? There was some water in the mill, not really fit for drinking. If there was a fire, it was more likely that they were going to be putting sand on it because of all the oil that was coming from these machines and soaked into the floor.
So somebody asked about what would be the equivalent of the $3. And we've gone back and forth about that over time. You can do some of those things online. We can look at it like inflation counters and things like that. But I tend to think if you can think of what an average room and board might be now, what somebody might pay to have, an apartment and food now, and think of that price, that thing as 1/3 of their pay, you can start to get a sense of what they're making here. They don't have as many taxes and other withdrawals and other things like that coming out of it. So it's not rich money, but it's not bad money. They're not, the wealthiest people, but they're not doing too bad.
They certainly felt like the wealthiest people because on a farm they had very little money.
Somebody says, if you're busy with your own bobbin, how do you watch somebody else's while they take a bathroom break? Well, there's the problem right there.
Yeah, and I did talk a little bit about how they weren't actually doing this.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
question
so
about
you're
how many
basically standing in front of the machine and observing a lot of it until the bobbin runs out. But still, you have to be there.
yeah, how many died or were killed in workplace injuries? Didn't happen often.
Right.
And we don't even know how many people got sick and died because generally when a mill girl got sick, she went home to her family. So we don't even have good records of illnesses, but there weren't a lot of catastrophic injuries.
I would
A lot of fingers.
Right. So someone says, what's the most common injury? And I would think that fingers and hands is probably the most common. And compared to losing your life or getting an arm taken off or something like that, it seems relatively minor, but obviously it's not minor to lose a finger or get a hand crushed or something like that. Somebody also was asking about temperature and conditions like that in the mills, and were they hot and cold? So I can tell you two things. One is from history, which is that the mills were sometimes hot and sometimes cold, but they're essentially just a big brick wall. It's basically a thick brick wall, but it's basically just a big giant building made out of a brick wall around a room. And if it gets cold, it's cold, and if it's hot, it's hot. They did use steam to help humidify the mills, to help provide heat, but also to keep the moisture level up, because humid conditions made the thread more pliable, made it less likely to break, which made it easier to run. So yeah, it was hot in there, and it was probably humid in there for most of the year.
All right, we got two questions. Did the factory workers stay and start families in Lowell, or did they go back to the farm? Yes, yes. They did a little bit of everything. Coming to Lowell opened up the world for a lot of these young women. So some of them did stay in Lowell and start families. Some of them went back to the farm. Oberlin College in Ohio was starting to take women, so several of them went out there to get an education. My favorite was a woman who went to Florida and bought a big house and set up a home for retired mill workers. And so they did a little bit of everything. It really opened their
Mhm.
eyes to the world outside of their tiny little farming community.
Yeah, prior to this, most of these women in these small farms, they would have grown up until they were old enough to get married, and then they would have moved, next door or down the street to another farm, and that's their whole life. It would have been right there. And suddenly they're aware of a new world, of other opportunities, of other possibilities, and of course, meeting new people, including new suitors and things like that. So there's a lot of possibilities of going back to the farm, of staying Lowell, or going to another city, moving west, doing something else. Um, this really is a big change for these women, that suddenly it's not as closed off as it had been before. Would the mill workers often stay at the mills until they were old enough to retire? Hmm. All right. And what did men do in Lowell? You want to take that one? Or you want me to?
Um, Men were the bosses. They all of the overseers were men, the mill owners were men, all of the accounting people were men, the people who signed the paychecks, they were all men. They also did the dangerous work. One of the steps was carting or brushing out the bales of cotton. That was more dangerous. That tended to be the men. And they were also in charge of the heavy lifting, moving 500-pound cotton bales, moving big bolts of cloth. So those were primarily the jobs of men. And just to give you an example, in 1840, in the Boott cotton mills where Frank and I are, there were about 900 people working about 900 women working in the mill and about 200 men. So you can see the differences there between the men and the women.
Yeah, so there was a definite ceiling to what women were allowed to do. Um, but a lot of the men were doing you know, uh, factory work as well, but they had more opportunities to do more things. Did women stay, or did any of them stay until they were old enough to retire? So in the early days, probably not as much. Probably not as much, but over time, more and more and more would stay for longer and longer, and it would be their whole life. Once you get to the more modern ages, the 20th century ages, the 19 teens, 1920s, 1930s, things like that. A lot of times the adult parents didn't want their kids to go work in the factories. They wanted them to have other opportunities to go someplace else. So there's a whole lot of mix. What was the percentage of girls who would have considered a success in their endeavors?
Would have been so.
So we're going to get to that in a second too.
Yeah, yeah, and working in the mill had a certain cachet, especially in the first 20 or 30 years of the factories. And it was a sort of an esteemed job, and they were held in high esteem because of the way they carried themselves and the way they became independent. Um, and someone said to compare conditions between the 1820s and the 1840s. They really didn't change a whole lot in those first 20 years. They were working more machines and there were more people working here, but the conditions really didn't change a whole lot until a little bit later.
Yeah, especially after the Civil War, it got much harder for workers. By and large, they were not married women working in the mills. That was sort of not the plan. They were mostly young women living in the boarding houses. Um, there were some eventually women who were married and men who were married who would be outside of that. Social life. There was a lot of things to do in Lowell, especially compared to the farms, right? We already talked about lectures, and people came here showing the newest technology, showing the craziest ideas, but also things like anti-slavery talks and,
Harvard
questions.
professors.
Yeah, all the newest information and newest thoughts. Um, and there would be traveling circuses and, lectures and, excuse me, concerts and, plays and all sorts of things that would come here.
I never
Um,
worked at Tufts Medical. I'm sorry, Beatrice.
um, yes, Call the Darkness Life kind of gives a
All the Darkest Light. Yep. There's
kind
several books about mill girls. If you're looking for a really good one it's a fun read. It's actually a young adult book. It's called Liddy, Lyddie. And then on the national park website there is a whole suite of other resources so you can delve in and find out all sorts of information about mill life in the 1840s.
Yeah, that was Catherine Patterson who came here, did a lot of research, and it's very
Yeah,
realistic of what life was
really
like
good.
and some of the various things that was going on here. Could the girls have visitors in the boarding house? Yes, you
Mhm.
could in the sort of public parts of the boarding house, like the dining room, parlor area where you could be um, watched, and the boarding house keeper could keep an eye on things like that, but not beyond there.
Someone asked if there was direct deposit at the bank. There was not. The bank was a separate entity from the mills, but the girls would take their pay and deposit that.
All right, we're gonna take a little break
All
here
right.
for just a second and take a look at. Do we have time more, Robert, or should we wrap it up?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
We're gonna.
let's find out about a little bit more about Sarah and Emily.
All right, so let's take a look at that. MaryBeth, I think I'm just going to show them back.
The overseers force us to work 13 to 14 hours a day, and the machines are going faster all of the time. And what do we get? Only a few more pennies at the end of the week? This room is hot and filled with cotton dust. I am coughing so much I can barely stand it. There are other girls who have had their fingers caught in the gears, or much worse. My friend was hit with a shuttle last week. We don't know if she will return to the mill after her stay at the hospital, and I don't know if I will ever see her again.
I like working in the mills. Now that I know my job, I am able to operate more machines and earn a bit more each week. The conditions here are no worse than anywhere else. Some of the girls are getting sick, but they were likely sickly to begin with. Some of the girls are complaining about the conditions here, but like my minister reminds us, it is not up to us to decide such matters.
MaryBeth, you just want to jump to the second videos?
Yeah.
Oops. Oh, I lost it. Hold on. Talk to people.
All right, let me pull up my chat again. Every time we go to a video, I lose my chat. Oh, yeah, we asked about the. So I will tell you, I mentioned that the girls sort of um, policed themselves as far as their morals, and there was a story about one woman who was sneaking out the back door of the boarding house to meet a man, and she wouldn't tell anybody who he was, and so the other mill girls in her boarding house thought that she was seeing a married man, and they really ostracized her and shunned her and sort of forced her to leave the mills. And it turns out they found out later that it was her brother who was unemployed and she was sneaking him food and she was too embarrassed to say anything. But so they did police each other as far as morals go.
Did you talk about kiss of death stuff earlier? Somebody's
I
asking
did
about
not.
tuberculosis spreading quickly. Do you want to talk about
Well,
stuff like that?
every disease spread quickly, and they didn't know as much about it as we do now. So between the boarding houses and the mills, things spread quickly. And they, with all the cotton dust going right into their lungs, they were sharing shuttles, and they would suck the threads through there to thread them. they would suck it through by putting their mouth in the shuttle and sucking it in. So if they were sharing shuttles, it's another way of spreading diseases.
Somebody's talking about the French Canadian documentary from last year. Yeah, I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it.
All right, let's take a
All
step
right, found it.
back. We're going to see if we can see what they had to say.
I've heard of a group of women who are fighting for better working conditions. I'm going to stay in Lowell and fight with them for shorter days and better conditions in the factories to protect all workers.
I have decided to stay in Lowell. I like the work and do not find it too taxing. I am sad that so many of my friends have decided to leave Lowell for good.
We kind of get an idea from those last two that things were starting to change towards the end. Workers were protesting the wages because the mills started to cut their wages. They were also protesting the length of the day. And in the early 1840s, they were sending petitions to the state legislature asking for a statewide 10-hour workday. Unfortunately, of the 2,500 signatures, most of them were women. And so the people who were voted into office did not enact the 10-hour day. It didn't happen until about 30 years later.
Yeah, but that's not the full story, right? Because those same women got those same legislators kicked out of Congress too.
They did. They used their power, even though they did not have the power to vote. They did affect the next election and did not. Those people that decided not to enact the 10-hour day and not to listen to them were not reelected.
And the sad thing is whether they were men or whether they were women, the working people did not have a whole lot of power. So changes to work, whether it's hours of the day or conditions or anything like that, were very, very slow to come over the course of the 100 years or so that we're talking about.
All right, that is pretty much the end of our presentation. Any other questions as we're here while you have us? I think a lot of the questions have come in as we've been going, which has been really nice. It's been a lot of fun to have all the questions coming through.
Talking, all the people talking about Emmeline and Call the Darkness Light. You already talked about Liddy. So there's a lot of mill girl literature out there. Why didn't they have showers? They didn't have the technology. They didn't have the water storage systems. They didn't have the pumps. Running water doesn't come into those buildings till in the 1850s. And then heating for those water didn't come in till after that. So when did the immigrants start to replace the mill girls? You want to do it?
1840s, really, they started to have more Irish immigrants come in. And then with the Civil War, the mills shut down because they didn't have a supply of cotton. Post-Civil War, they really went out of their way to recruit French Canadian mill workers. And then after that, the waves of immigration coming in the late 19th and early 20th century really filled up the mills with immigrants.
Boott in the Boott mills is a guy named Kirk Boott, who was one of the instrumental people in the early days of Lowell, who's sort of designed where the canal systems and the mills were all going to be. And he was the person in charge, or named after this mill. Was that it? Were there strikes? Yes, there were strikes in Lowell and other mill towns beginning in the 1820s, right after they started the mills. Two big ones in the 1830s here. Showed the power, or at least the determination of women to walk off the mill, to make their voices heard, to be public about it. And as MaryBeth said, in the 1840s, signing petitions and making speeches and becoming public about it. So there is a lot. It's just a very slow process of 1820s right through the 1930s before a lot of this stuff becomes real law.
Was fire a problem in the Lowell mills? There were some small fires, but they thought about fires from the beginning, and they kept buildings separate until later on, mid 19th century, when they had a gravity fed fire suppression system, and then they started to combine buildings. So they really made it so that if there was a fire, it would be contained in a small section.
More people who have family history working here. where immigrants of both sexes hide. Yeah, once we get past that early years of the boarding houses, it's not so much divided by women anymore, and all of those basic jobs are going to become um, men and women, and over time the relative pay goes down dramatically, so it's harder and harder to sort of make ends meet working in the mills, but they do it because they have to work and they need a place to keep the family fed. At its peak, how many workers were there here? Let me think. I would say in the city there was around 120,000 at the peak, and maybe 40,000 of those might have been in the mills. There was a whole lot of other industry around and other people who were living here. About half of the mills got torn down at some point or another. But about half of them are still here. We have a couple of full complexes of mills, the Massachusetts mills, the Boott mills, and some of the others. So there's still a lot of them here, which is good for us. That's why we ended up with a national park here, because we have a lot of the mills left.
Yeah, the first mill did open. Someone asked when the first mill in Lowell opened was 1823. So the brain stopped working for a minute, and the last mill shut down in 1950. Frank, help me.
8.
Hey, 1958.
That's
And,
as
and at
a
that point, most
yeah.
of the manufacturing had moved south because that's where the cotton was. So you didn't have transportation costs, and workers were willing to work for less money. The workers up here had started to unionize.
Do you know about the mill girl from Maine who made a major success of herself and now had an elaborate sculpture at her grave? Was it Lucy Larcom? Which one are we talking about there? That's the
That
one out.
is Louisa Wells.
Mhm.
And she had quite a sizable bit of money in the bank when she passed away. And her will stated that it was to be made into a monument for her at the cemetery. And her family argued about it for years and years and years. Meanwhile, that money was accumulating, that interest. And by the time it was finally settled that yes, her family had to honor her will, it was quite a big chunk of change. And her monument stands, what, 12 feet high, and it's marble, and it's engraved with an angel looking down over a mill girl who's holding a bobbin in her hand. It's
And you can still
absolutely
see the
beautiful.
thread and everything else. It's
If you
amazing
if
work.
you look up the Lowell Cemetery, it's probably on their website.
Yeah. So people ask about other mills. So the mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts, just up the river, were very similar. And the mills up in the other direction, going upstream into New Hampshire in Manchester, both huge mill cities themselves, were both modeled after, and to a certain amount, the same investor, the same people doing this. So they were copying the same thing. And that would expand throughout Massachusetts, eventually into New Hampshire and Maine, and then eventually going out. And then, as we said, by about the early 1900s, it's starting to move down south. Transportation. In the 1820s and 30s, it's primarily horse transportation, either carriages or coaches or something like that. By mid 1830, they do have a train system. The first one is going to go between here and Boston, but then expand out to all the coasts and Salem and up into New Hampshire and all that sort of thing. So that's the early not 1830s, 1840s. Do you have a bobbin that you could show us what it looks like? Hold on. I have a
While
shuttle
you're
here,
okay, yeah, can you pull the
and
bobbin out?
inside I have this red bobbin here, so you can see the bobbin. And this one has red thread, and I don't see the end, so I can't tell you where it is, but
Might be glued
it's in
in.
there somewhere. But so you can kind of see the thread on here.
All right. Frank, I think we have
Very good.
one last question, and then we will let these lovely people go.
Mhm.
Could married women work in the mill?
Uh,
Generally, when women got married, they did not work in the mill. However, there were some women who were here who had escaped bad marriages, so technically they were still married, but they came here to get away from bad situations and support themselves. I've never read an account of a woman who was married living with her husband working in the mills until the Irish started to work here, and then definitely married women as well.
Yeah, once they get to an immigrant population in the mills, it's very common. What percentage was cotton versus wool? So in Lowell, it was primarily a cotton town. So almost all of them were here. We had one that did wool production and one that moved to carpet production. In Lawrence, they were mostly wool production. In Manchester, they were all cotton. It kind of varied a little bit on what product you were making. In by and large, though, it's cotton production because that's where most of the business is going, and they're making everything from basic cloth, for shirts and dresses and skirts and whatever, to sheets and towels and blankets and everything here.
All right, folks, we want to thank you so much. Thank you, Robert, for hosting us. This was so much fun having all of you here and answering all your questions. This was a blast. Thank you so much for having us.
So folks, let's give Frank and MaryBeth a wonderful big virtual round of applause. They're used to, they mainly speak to kids. So I think hopefully it was nice to them to be able to interact with adults with these classes. But I learned quite a bit. This was wonderful. And I think you answered about 100 questions. That was remarkable. So, yes. So I'm sure we'll do this again down the road on a slightly different topic. Love to do it again. Folks, look for an email from me later today before 5 o'clock with a link to this recording and information about some other upcoming virtual programs. And please don't forget to fill out the feedback survey when you exit the Zoom. So thank you all so much. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day and their weekend. Thanks, MaryBeth.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Frank.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too.